Right now, what we have is many of these school districts, we have children who are left defenseless.
Aoibheann, thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So, emotional day this morning. You heard a lot of testimony regarding the school security bill, and this is specifically HB 415.
That's correct.
And this bill, there's a lot of misinformation around this bill. Why don't, and again, it pertains to essentially arming some degree of, or allowing to arm some degree of school employees on a state level. So right now, school districts can do it. Board of Education members can decide collectively, hey, we want to be able to arm individual people or, whatever the protocol is. But this bill looks to make it a state law that allows an employee under the most rigorous of training regimens and certifications to carry a firearm on campus.
Yeah, so House Bill 415 allows a school employee as defined under the bill with an enhanced concealed weapons permit, was issued under Idaho state law, to be able to conceal carry on the school grounds in which they're employed.
Okay, this is not random unemployed volunteers. This is not parents dropping their kids off at school. You have to be a school employee as defined by this bill.
Correct.
Okay, and this is just something that would then allow, say, for instance, I know a teacher right now who is a law enforcement agent in a different state who would very much like to conceal carry to protect herself at the very least and her students here in Idaho, but she can't because that's not the rules in the school district. So this is designed to not just protect students, but also protect the adults that we entrust our children with.
Absolutely. That's exactly what this bill is about. Is your right to self-defense is guaranteed by the Second Amendment to the United States Constitution, as well as the Idaho State Constitution, the right to self-defense. Why is our question? Why does that end when you enter an elementary school, a middle school, or a high school? Right? This is not about taking the place of law enforcement. This is about protecting children. This is about protecting our teachers, protecting our students, and giving them the tool to be the immediate response until law enforcement comes in the worst case scenario, and that is a school shooting here in Idaho.
Yeah. Okay, let's unpack a little bit of this. Now, a lot of people I've heard say, hey, we don't need teachers having the capacity to be armed. And again, it's not just teachers, it's school employees and under very specific circumstances. What we need is more defendable or, robust infrastructure upgrades so that someone can't enter a school ground and, perpetrate a horrendous crime. What's wrong with that?
Let's just take a look, like a step back at what schools look like in Idaho. A high school in Boise may be looking different than a middle school or an elementary school. And the size of the school, the type of the school, the resources the school have vary wildly across a state. And again, it doesn't matter how much protection you have. If you cannot defend yourself or your students, right now what we have is many of these school districts, we have children who are left defenseless. They're dropped off every morning. We have parents entrusting the life of their students to the school to receive an education. The last thing they should worry about is a school shooter. Right now, we don't have the resources to protect all our students. What House Bill 415 would do is give our school employees who have this license, who have a demonstrated legal knowledge, which is required to get the license, have a demonstrated ability to fire, have been signed off by the sheriff, and have, completed a background check, that those people who otherwise can protect themselves and their students outside of the school can also do so inside the school grounds. They have the ability to carry concealed at a park, at a grocery store, at a shopping mall, you name the place. Why, at a school, can a teacher not carry concealed? Why are we limiting their ability to defend themselves and the students? And that's the question.
Right. And one point you brought up earlier is, hey, look, the Second Amendment is obviously here, at least in part, for self-defense. Second Amendment is very wide and important. But again, first things first, like self-defense, right? There are other places in the community where we relinquish that capacity, right? Like at courthouses, you can't conceal carry into a courtroom. Airports, you can't conceal carry through an airport or something like that. But in those places, they have robust security mechanisms in place. Like if I walk into, like I've been into courthouses before for a number of reasons. One in particular, I was taking a class at Cal, and I had to go down to the courthouse and watch some hearings. It was a law school, prep course. So I'm like, oh, okay, great. Like I'll go down and I'll see law happening, right? Like that was the idea. So of course you go down and you have to go through this metal detector, and it was like, oh, like, all right, here we go. You go through the whole thing and you get in there. And, you see the proceedings and whatnot. And thinking about that, if something happens in the courthouse, they have all kinds of security within the courtroom. They have security at the front. They have security all throughout the building. So even though I've relinquished my capacity to defend myself, I do have faith that the institution that I've entered will do a sufficient job of defending me as a citizen, right? Same thing with an airport, right? Like once you get through security, universally, most likely people are disarmed. That's knives, razor blades, like anything. You can't sneak stuff through, or at least you're not supposed to be able to. That's why you all stand in long lines. But in schools, we relinquish that right, and we ask teachers to relinquish that right without providing them the same kind of existing security forces that something like a courthouse or an airport actually use to make sure that the people that they have that are disarmed theoretically aren't in harm's way.
Yeah, and Idaho children deserve every protection, every student. And right now in Idaho, every student is not getting that same protection because, as you mentioned, when I go into a courthouse, I know that if I'm not armed, nobody else is, because I've gone through a metal detector. I have gone through a screening. I have made sure, right, that I know that when I'm in there, there's no bad guys that can otherwise go in there who are intent on causing harm, at least not with a firearm. In the school, we don't have that. And again, you asked, right, what does it look like, these schools? Maybe it's a high school that is fully enclosed and we can lock the doors and get, bulletproof windows or whatever it may be. There's other ways around that. But there are many schools here in Idaho that are open campuses. Recess is outside. We have extracurricular activities that are going on outside. And time again in these school shooting situations, we see that the response time is lacking. And in that time frame, minutes, seconds saves life. And if a teacher can save the life of a student because they're otherwise lawfully carrying, why are we not affording the teachers the ability to do that?
Yeah, speaking of response time, I spoke with a gentleman by the name of Rob Gillis on Monday, and he was the first response to a school shooting down in Southern California. And they were going through all kinds of training ad nauseum. He was like, everything was like another active shooter training, they were using different facilities to do the training all over the place. And when he said when he got the call, and he realized there were multiple calls coming in. He's like, you get a bogus call. It's like one person calls in. You have to treat it the exact same way, and you're not happy about it. And, you're anxious pulling up at it, but you only received one call. You're like, hey, look, this is odd. Odds are this is not an active shooter. But he said they received the call. He was 12 minutes away, turns around, flips everything on, takes off, right? And throughout the 12 minutes, they kept getting additional calls. So he knew it was the real deal. It took him 12 minutes to get there. And he said by the time he arrived, there were individuals that were already shot, receiving emergency CPR from people. He runs into the building without grabbing his shotgun or his AR and, just his handgun, and, goes to actively try to find the shooter. But 12 minutes is a long time. And this was not like a rural community in LA or something where it's like, I don't know if there are real rural communities in LA, but the point is, this wasn't LA. It was in Southern California area. And, you have to recognize, I think it's statistically every 10 seconds in a school shooting, someone else dies. So if you say that we can get the response time from 6 minutes to 5 minutes, pretty conclusively, then you're literally statistically saving 6 lives. And it's just an absolutely atrocious consideration to think like, okay, 12 minutes of people, waiting for help when you could have had somebody, if Rob was there just as a police officer dropping off his kid, right? Or excuse me, as a civilian dropping off his kid, he couldn't concealed carry on campus, so he wouldn't have been able to address it the same way. But again, back to the issue here. The concern that people have, though, still comes down to what I've heard is that no matter what, there's going to be this added risk with somebody concealed carrying on campus if they're like teachers. Like, I think the idea is that they don't just, teachers could get mad at students and have a psychotic moment. So some people have advocated for safety from teachers if they get really frustrated. It's like, okay, so you think the teachers are going to start shooting people? Little out there. But a lot of people do have anxieties with the idea that teachers will somehow be irresponsible and something bad will happen because the gun is on campus brought on by the teacher. Like, do you think that's something that is a justified concern, but a risk people should take in the name of safety, or do you think that's unjustified?
Well, let's take a step back. These teachers, outside of 7 a.m. to 3 or 8 to 4, whatever the school time frame is, they've got an enhanced concealed weapons license. We don't trust them any less when they go to the grocery store and they're carrying. We don't trust them any less when they go to the zoo or the aquarium if they're able to carry their concealed license there, right? They're there to protect themselves and their students. They're not having a psychotic break. These situations, the sky is falling and it's not happening. We have schools in Idaho. We have many schools in Idaho whose school boards have approved teachers to carry with less than just an enhanced concealed license. And we have not seen crime. We haven't seen these psychotic breaks where teachers then just start turning on their own students. But I think it is important to note under this bill is there is no affirmative duty for the teacher who is carrying to act. Because think about that situation where it may be that teacher's student who comes through the door. Maybe they freeze. Maybe on them, they don't want to take the life of their student. There is no affirmative duty to act under this, but we also have some liability protections for these teachers if they do engage. And again, it needs to be an active shooter situation. It needs to be imminent threat of, kind of real harm to be done to these students, and that we're allowing these teachers to do just what they would do outside of the classroom, inside of the classroom. And again, we've talked about this from the law enforcement perspective. Under this bill, there is a coordination between the teacher who has the license, the principal, the school intendant, the school board, as well as law enforcement, that they know who has a license, that it is a valid license, and that they are carrying on the school grounds.
Right. I spoke with Rob Gillis about this. There seems to be a disconnect when you talk about arming some level of school employee. People don't mind if a police officer comes on campus because the number one criticism is we don't want guns on campus. It's like, okay, what guns? Do you mind if the sheriff comes on campus? They're like, no, the sheriff is fine. It's like, well, then it's not the gun. It's the person, right? You don't mind if the sheriff comes on campus. People don't mind if police officers come on campus. And in fact, in a tragedy, they want the police on campus as quickly as possible. So sheriff, no problem. Police officer, no problem. SRO, right? No problem. But the second you take a step down to somebody who happens to teach geometry or English, all of a sudden that's a real problem, right? And again, this is not just anyone being able to do it. Going through the proper steps, it seems to be like the most immediate and reasonable solution to the problem of, in the event that the infrastructure upgrades fail or somebody finds a way through them, you then go to step 2 of we need the most immediate and forceful response possible to protect the staff and the students. And if that forceful response is always, 5 to 12 minutes away, that equals a substantial loss of life or potentially substantial loss of life. One parent asked the other day why we couldn't just put police officers at every single campus, right? And it's my understanding that the problem with that obviously is, hey, look, we just don't have funding. Like, and we'll never have funding to put station police officers during all operating hours at campuses across the entire state. I mean, it's just not a possible thing. So that comes down to self-protection,
Yeah.
right?
And the cost is just, it's so high. And, you know, the other side of that coin is one officer is great. One SRO is great if you can have that. But in a lot of instances, our campuses are much bigger than what one person can respond to. Why do we not allow teachers who, again, otherwise can protect themselves and their students and those around them and their families through the right to self-defense? Why in a classroom situation are they any different? Why around kids, the ones who deserve the most protection, right? That's the fundamental question on this. That's a fundamental disagreement, is who can be armed. When you walk around the state of Idaho, I think to make the assumption most of us are armed, right? We have a permitless carry system. You don't even need a permit. You can be 18 years old and otherwise lawfully allowed to carry a firearm, and you can conceal or open carry that firearm. Then we have these permit systems. This enhanced concealed license system is what we're asking teachers. Those, again, go through the background check, go through legal training. What happens if you use your firearm? What happens if you draw your firearm? What happens if you have to use your firearm in self-defense? These teachers, these school employees who would otherwise be able to carry under this bill, have gone through that training. They have worked with the instructor, an NRA instructor or others, and then been signed off by the sheriff. Why are they okay to defend life outside of a classroom wall, but not inside of it?
Right. And signing off by the sheriff, it's such a clear point. It's like, listen, this is not just every person wandering around campus. It's literally saying, get the sheriff with what the sheriff knows in the sheriff's capacity to say this person is responsible enough to do this thing, right? Under the weight of the sheriff's authority. It seems pretty clear. We talk a lot about, and we've kind of touched on it, but most people talk a lot about security for students, right? And again, I did mention that I do know someone who's former law enforcement that would want to carry. I think the more I've talked with people about this, about a multitude of issues around this, it seems like we ask a lot from our teachers, right? We ask that they, go through a lot of school. They have to take a lot of tests. They don't get paid very much. Fine. And that's a whole different debate. But we do ask a lot of them, and we ask the best from them. And the more I've talked to people about this, the more I've wondered, like, what about the teachers? Like, what about the adults who want to protect themselves and want to protect other people? Like, we're asking them to enter an environment that is, as I think, I can't remember if you said it before or after, but like the school sites are like ripe for the plucking for deranged individuals. It's like, why are we making their working conditions this thing where they're not capable of defending themselves or the people they're working with, their students? And it's like, nobody wants a student walking around with a firearm, but to understand that adults who would have otherwise carry on campus could find themselves in this horrendous situation where they can't defend themselves. It's like, why are we asking that of them as well?
Yeah. And I think it's very important to note this bill does not allow students to carry.
No.
Again, to get an enhanced concealed license, you have to be 21. So even if there was an 18-year-old student, right. This is a sidebar from the conversation.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to note that what we're talking about is giving these teachers an option.
Right.
You do not have to carry. We're not marching around and asking every teacher in the state of Idaho to get the license and you have to have it. This is if you want to. If you feel that you would like to protect yourself and your students at school, you have the ability to do that if you've reached these thresholds. You've met these marks. You've communicated with your school.
Sure.
School has communicated with law enforcement. And I think it's also important to note for our folks, the information, the permit information, who carries, and the information in that is confidential. It's also exempt from Public Records Act. So I want to make sure if you're carrying, right, you're not going to be a target now as a teacher because now everybody knows that you carry on campus.
Sure.
The whole idea of concealed carry is that nobody knows, right? It is to protect yourself. It's to protect those around you. It's not to be able to go in and wave your gun around
Sure.
and say, hey, come and get me in this classroom. No, this is about self-defense in the worst case scenario should it play out in your school. And if that teacher says, yep, I'm willing to stand up and defend my students, they should have the ability to do that, again, just as they do outside of the classroom, inside of the classroom, or at recess.
And from a liability standpoint, talk to me about this. In the event that there's a school shooting and a teacher pulls out, a teacher or staff member pulls out a firearm to defend, who's liable for what happens after that point?
So the bill has two provisions on liability. If you are a teacher who is otherwise, again, lawfully carrying under this bill, and under this bill, you have to have immediate control of that firearm. You can't put it in your desk and walk away and hope somebody doesn't get it. You can't leave it in the bathroom for a student to find. You then fall out of the civil damages liability under the bill. Let's take a step down to the section 11 of what this bill is. This is, again, the worst case scenario. What happens if a teacher does engage or doesn't? The bill does not have an affirmative duty to act. There's no affirmative duty not to act. It is within the discretion of the teacher who has that license whether they want to engage. That is a personal decision and is written explicitly in the bill. When it comes down to liability, again, this is why we have the enhanced concealed carry portion of this bill. Under the enhanced, you have legal training, so you understand what happens when you use a firearm. The bill does protect for civil and criminal liability if a teacher does engage or doesn't engage. And one of the things that I think we should note, and I talked about it today in my testimony, is why civil and criminal liability. We're talking about the worst possible scenario. A school shooting happens and a teacher responds. So let's go down option number 1. The teacher responds. The teacher engages a student, or maybe it's not even a student. Maybe it's a deranged person off the street who's willing to cause harm, who comes in intent on committing a mass shooting in this school. The teacher engages. What we don't want to have happen is that teacher be held liable, say a wrongful death suit from the shooter's family. Or on the flip side, where a teacher maybe doesn't engage, and because they had a firearm for maybe a student in that classroom who, is put in harm's way, we don't want, the families to come back and say, hey, we're going to sue that teacher for not engaging. So there are civil and criminal protections under this bill. And I think it's important for that teacher to know that, but also to know that they don't have to act, but they do have the option. They do have the ability, and we've given them the tools to be able to protect Idaho students.
And this is not, the liability also does not fall on the school district, correct? So in the event that there's a school shooting, deranged individual, a teacher acts in his or her self-defense as well as students, whatever happens from that, the school district is not responsible for what has happened.
No. So the protections, right, are for the school if you're properly carrying. And then what happens? You're going to go down, we're looking at, the argument of self-defense and the crime that was committed and who was at fault and what happened. And you go down the whole legal rabbit hole, for lack of a better term. But we want teachers to be enabled. We want them to have the tools, and we want them to be able to protect students. Because right now, there are many schools where students are not protected because a school board refuses to act, because they're afraid of liability, or perhaps they just don't like guns. What we heard a lot about today was that you could, come to school and you could conceal carry a AR-15, a semi-automatic rifle. Well, show me somebody who can conceal carry that. That'd be a hard thing. You're pretty tall. Maybe you could do that.
Unlikely without a giant coat.
And, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about typically, a handgun that's otherwise used in self-defense. That's what we're talking about. All of these crazy scenarios of a teacher then engaging a student, where we have seen this and in other states, we haven't seen a problem. But what we have seen is a deterrent from crime, that these people who are deranged, who are willing to take the life of students at school, the future of our society, who are there for an education, who now have no protection just because they're inside a fourth grade classroom. We need to enable teachers. We need to enable the janitor, the crossing guard, the principal, to be able to come to the rescue until law enforcement can get there.
What were other objections that you heard this morning?
And one of the things we've talked about is, and we had this conversation with many law enforcement agencies in the state, who these agencies decided to stay neutral on the bill as we explained where we were coming from and what this bill really does. Let's get rid of all the scare tactics and the worst case scenarios and the maybe this or this could happen. Let's talk about what the bill really does and what it's really aiming to do. And one was, as law enforcement responds, even if there's a good guy with a gun, how are they going to know who the bad guy is? Because they're responding to a school shooting, they see a gun. Well, first and foremost, law enforcement goes through rigorous training. They cannot just go into a building and start blasting.
Right.
They have to identify the threat. They're getting briefed before they go in. These are panic situations, but we have well-trained and great men and women who serve in law enforcement in Idaho. They're trained to be able to discern what they're going in and looking after. Again, we have communication with law enforcement that there are teachers. Here's who the teachers are. There's a picture of them. Law enforcement knows. But number two, the flip side of that is, again, we have this legal training requirement under the Enhanced Concealed Weapons Permit. So I know, and I'm trained what to do if there is a shooting, whether it's a school shooting or home defense or at a park, what to do. And when law enforcement responds, you put your firearm down. You don't engage. You communicate with them. We're not pointing firearms at law enforcement.
Right. It's my understanding also that in some schools in the state of Idaho, I can't remember exactly which ones, part of the protocol is that the concealed carrier dons a certain garment, like an orange, imagine like an orange hunter's vest, right? And I'm not saying that's exactly what it is, but the idea is you wear something that's immediately identifiable to the responding law enforcement so they know that the person that is on campus with the firearm is not the shooter. That garment, again, I don't know what that is, and I think that's part of the deal, right? Like, people don't know what that person will put on to indicate that they are an armed individual when police respond, but that's an easy thing right away to say, like, oh yeah, that would make sense. Like, if police are going down the hall and somebody has like a neon green vest on, they're like, okay, this person is part of the response team. They're not the shooter.
Yeah. I mean, we could go down 1,000 scenarios on how to identify
how to solve
this.
the problem, right? Yeah.
A problem that is hopefully never a problem.
Right.
But what this bill is, what this is asking is, right, we don't want everybody to know who and when and how they're carrying. It's just a normal teacher. That those kids should have no idea that teacher's armed. They're there for their education. They're there to learn the firearm is a tool for the school employee. It's concealed and no one knows. And so, again, this is in a response. This is an emergency. Emotions are high.
Sure.
How do we communicate with law enforcement? I think this bill is very thoughtfully laid out to have the information up front for law enforcement, the teachers, and the schools. Let's hope this never happens. And if it does, law enforcement and that person who has the enhanced concealed license knows what to do in the event of a shooting, just as they would do outside of school grounds.
Gotcha. Is there anything we've missed?
One thing we talked about in the hearing today is who is asking for this. And a lot that was brought up was law enforcement's not asking for this. Well, law enforcement stayed neutral. Parents aren't asking for this. Teachers aren't asking for this. Did you ask for a survey from teachers? Did you get a survey from school boards? Well, what we're hearing is what I know, right? I have the privilege to represent the NRA and our tens of thousands of members across the state of Idaho. And what they're telling me is that they want to be able to protect students in schools. NRA members are moms, their grandmas, their grandchildren, their teachers, their coaches, their bus drivers, their crossing guards, they're your neighbor, your attorney, you name it. They want to be able to protect children. And we have this, flourishing of mass shootings. Why are they happening here? And until we get down to the baseline of that and we address mental health and what's causing this, a good guy with a gun is not a bad guy. A good guy with a gun can stop a bad guy. And if we give the teachers the tools, and that is their enhanced concealed weapon, they can stop a school shooting. They can save lives of children on school grounds.
And just the mere presence of them, the capacity for that person to be there, acts as a strong deterrent. And again, to say parents aren't asking for this in such a broad statement, it's like, which parents? You're saying all parents? You're saying teachers aren't asking for this. Which teachers? All teachers? That's disingenuous.
Yeah.
And again, it's a complex problem. I think both parties, the people for it and against it, are both coming down to a concern for children, right? The people that don't want firearms on campus, they're worried about children. And the people that do want the most rigorous set of circumstances to allow firearms on campus, they're concerned about children, right? So it's not like everybody's concerned about children. There's just a disagreement on exactly how to address that if the worst case scenario should come to pass. And I mean, truthfully, I don't think we're ever going to really put this genie back in the bottle. Like with deranged people talk a lot about, again, infrastructure upgrade and addressing the underlying problem of mental health. You're never going to stop all murderers, right? And you're never going to stop deranged murderers from targeting innocent people. And that would be wonderful, right? Just like we talked about, I remember talking to people about the instances of sexual assault on college campuses, having a discussion years ago. And they're like, we just need to educate people to stop them. I'm like, you're never going to stop. Like if somebody's hell-bent on assaulting someone, you could tell them that it's bad. You could try to educate them in a multitude of ways. That's not going to stop them because they're a violent criminal, right? And why they're violent criminals, that's a great question. But I don't think there's ever been a civilization in the history of humanity that somehow eliminated, for lack of a better term, bad apples. Nobody's been able to do it. So I think it's a fair statement to say we're probably always going to have to address school safety in some way, right? And we could address it the way we have been, which is, okay, we'll have a response team some duration of time away from campus, and we'll do our best to upgrade the infrastructure so that it's hard to get in. We can keep doing that, but it doesn't seem to be yielding fantastic results throughout the country.
Yeah. And criminals, by their very nature, are willing to break the law. That's what makes them a criminal. So somebody who goes to a school with the intent to shoot people or even yielding a machete down the hallway are there knowingly breaking a crime. That is not a surprise to anybody. So we have these criminals, and we have now teachers who have the inability to defend themselves and defend their students. It's important that we give them the tools, we give them the resources to be able to combat this until law enforcement can show up in those 5 minutes, those 7 minutes, those 12 minutes until we have a response time. And, we talked about, okay, who's asking for this? And the claim was that nobody's asking for this. And I believe it was Representative Young during the hearing said maybe those in the room, those who on a Wednesday morning in downtown Boise could come sit in this room and oppose this bill. And she said that during the hearing, clearly people were watching, as she had hundreds of emails come in support of this bill, saying we're asking for this, we want this, we need to protect our students, and we need to give school employees the ability to protect themselves and the students when they're on school grounds. They can do so elsewhere. They're in your community. They're your neighbor. They're your bag checker. They're everything. Why are we eliminating the ability for self-defense once you enter the school grounds? And that's what this bill is giving them a tool to protect students.
Aoibheann, I appreciate you. Thank you for taking the time today. Thank you for talking about this. Again, it's a very complex situation, very, very charged. I mean, there are few things, if nothing, I think, for the average person that matter more to them than their kids. So thanks for doing what you can to uphold the Constitution and, explain to people what's going on in the Capitol.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity. Appreciate you.
This podcast is brought to you by MTU Studios. If you're looking to start a podcast or need content for your business or personal use, content of any type, please reach out to MTU Studios. MTUstudios.com. We'd love to help.